Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Timeless Affairs. The afternoon was tranquil when Pastor Angela entered my home, an unexpected visit that would reveal profound insights about boundaries, desire, and control. Initially, her presence exuded a soothing, maternal quality, yet it soon awakened a deeper, more forbidden yearning within me. What transpired next was a pivotal moment for both of us, marked by an intensity that made it clear there was no turning back. It was one of those serene afternoons where time seemed to stand still, the house illuminated by the gentle golden light of the sun, while I reclined in the living room, lost in thought. My parents had told me earlier in the week that Pastor Angela would be visiting our home to check in on our family, something she did from time to time, but this visit felt different. Pastor Angela was an older woman, but she carried herself with grace and a subtle warmth that drew people in. There was something about her that always seemed so calm, so in control. She had this way of speaking soft yet commanding. That made you hang on to her every word. I always found myself mesmerized by her, something I didn't fully understand until today. When the doorbell rang, I felt a twinge of excitement. I opened the door and there she was, Pastor Angela. Her silver hair was neatly tied back, her eyes kind and full of understanding. She wore a modest dress, one that suited her age and position, but there was an undeniable elegance to her. "Good afternoon," she greeted me with a warm smile, her voice soft yet filled with authority. "Is your family home?" I shook my head, explaining that my parents had just stepped out to run errands. They should be back soon, though. "Would you like to come in and wait?" She nodded, stepping into the house, and I led her to the living room. The air felt different with her presence, as if the room had suddenly become smaller, more intimate. We sat across from each other, and for a while we made small talk about the church, her latest sermon, and how she'd been keeping busy. But there was something in the air, something unsaid. After a while, there was a lull in the conversation. She looked at me with those calm, knowing eyes and asked, "How are you doing? Really?" There was something in her tone, something deeper than casual concern. I hesitated, unsure of how to answer. It wasn't often that someone asked about my feelings, especially not in the way she did. "I've been fine, I guess," I said, my voice trailing off, unsure if I should say more. She leaned forward slightly, her gaze never leaving mine. "Fine isn't the same as good," she said softly. "You seem like you've been carrying something heavy. Do you want to talk about it?" Her words felt like a gentle push, as if she knew something I hadn't even admitted to myself. I felt my chest tighten, emotions I had kept buried for so long, beginning to rise to the surface. Justin, don't know," I began, my voice shaky. "I feel like I'm stuck, like there's something missing, but I don't know what." Pastor Angela nodded, her expression full of understanding. "Sometimes we get so used to hiding parts of ourselves, even from ourselves. It can be difficult to face what's really inside." She paused, her eyes softening. "But you don't have to do it alone." Her words hung in the air, and before I could stop myself, I felt a tear roll down my cheek. She reached out gently, taking my hand in hers. Her touch was soft, comforting, and I found myself leaning into the warmth of it. "It's okay to feel lost." Sometimes, she whispered, her voice barely audible. "We're all searching for something. Sometimes it's connection. Sometimes it's love." The way she said love made my heart skip a beat. There was a weight to that word, a deeper meaning that I hadn't expected. I looked at her, really looked at her. And in that moment, something shifted. Her presence, once comforting and maternal, now felt different. There was an intimacy between us that hadn't been there before, and I wasn't sure how to react to it. Her hand remained on mine, her thumb gently stroking my skin, and I could feel my pulse quickening. The room seemed to grow warmer, the air thicker. I wasn't sure if it was my imagination or if something had truly changed between us, but I felt a pull, a magnetic force drawing me closer to her. "Sometimes," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper, "we find love in the most unexpected places." There was no mistaking the way she was looking at me now, her gaze filled with something that went beyond simple concern. It was as if she could see right through me, see the desires I hadn't even admitted to myself. My heart was racing, my thoughts a jumbled mess, but I couldn't look away from her. There was something about her, something that made it impossible to resist. She leaned in slowly, her face just inches from mine, my breath caught in my throat, and for a moment time seemed to stand still. Her lips hovered near mine, close enough that I could feel the warmth of her breath, but she didn't close the distance just yet. It was a moment suspended in time, filled with tension and unspoken desire, and then ever so slowly she pressed her lips to mine. It was a soft, tentative kiss, but it sent a jolt of electricity through me. I hadn't expected this, hadn't even realized I wanted it, but now that it was happening, I couldn't imagine stopping. She pulled back slightly, her eyes searching mine for any sign of hesitation, but I didn't want her to stop. I didn't want to be anywhere else but here in this moment with her. I reached out my hand, resting gently on her cheek, and she leaned into my touch. There was something so tender about the way she looked at me, something that made me feel safe, yet also excited in a way I hadn't before. Our kisses grew deeper, more urgent as the unspoken tension between us finally gave way. Her hands found their way to my shoulders, then slid down my arms, her touch sending shivers through me. I had never felt anything like this before, never experienced such an overwhelming need for someone. As we continued to kiss, the world outside seemed to disappear. There was no one else, nothing else, just the two of us lost in the moment. Time seemed to blur, each kiss blending into the next, each touch leaving me craving more. Pastor Angela's hands were on my chest now, her fingers tracing delicate patterns on my skin. I could feel the heat rising between us, could feel the growing intensity of her desire mirrored in my own. Yet even in the midst of all this passion, there was a tenderness to her movements, as if she was guiding me through something sacred, something forbidden but irresistible. Her lips moved to my neck, planting soft kisses along my jawline, and I couldn't help but gasp at the sensation. My body was on fire, every nerve ending alive with anticipation. I wanted more, I needed more, but there was something about the way she took her time, savoring every moment, that made the experience even more intense. She pulled back slightly, her eyes locking with mine once again. "Are you okay?" she asked softly, her voice full of concern, but also something else, something deeper. I nodded, unable to find the words to express what I was feeling. All I knew was that I didn't want this moment to end. She smiled, a soft, knowing smile, and then kissed me again. This time it was slower, more deliberate, as if she was savoring every second. The intensity of the moment built gradually, the tension between us growing with every touch. Every kiss, minutes passed, though it felt like hours, and still she didn't rush. She seemed to be in no hurry, content to draw out the moment, to let the anticipation build. It was both maddening and exhilarating, this slow burn of desire that seemed to consume us both. And then, just when I thought I couldn't take it any longer, she pulled me closer, her body pressing against mine in a way that made my heart race. There was no denying it now, this was more than just a kiss, more than just a fleeting moment of passion. This was something deeper, something neither of us had anticipated, but both of us needed. Her hand slid down my back and I could feel the heat radiating from her skin. I pressed my lips to hers again, this time with more urgency, more need, and she responded in kind. Our bodies seemed to move in perfect sync, each touch, each kiss driving us further into the depths of desire. We were both lost, now lost in the moment, in each other. It felt like nothing else mattered, like the world outside didn't exist. All that mattered was this connection, this overwhelming need to be closer to her, to feel her, to know her in a way I hadn't known anyone before. She pulled back slightly, her breath heavy, her eyes full of something I couldn't quite place. "We shouldn't be doing this," she whispered, her voice full of regret but also longing. "But I can't stop, neither could I." And so we continued our movements, slow and deliberate, drawing out the moment for as long as we could. Time lost all meaning as we surrendered to the pull between us, the passion that had been simmering beneath the surface for so long, finally finding its release. But even in the height of our passion, there was a tenderness, a sense of something more than just physical desire. There was a connection between us, something deep and unspoken, something that went beyond mere attraction. As the afternoon wore on, the sun dipping lower in the sky, we finally pulled away from our embrace. But the intensity between us didn't fade. If anything, it grew stronger and more palpable. The air in the room felt thick with tension, a kind that made my skin tingle with anticipation. Pastor Angela's eyes, once so calm and composed, now had a fire in them that I had never seen before. It wasn't just desire, it was something deeper, something more raw and real. She exhaled slowly, her breath shaky as she looked at me, her gaze lingering on my lips as if she was contemplating something forbidden. "Or shouldn't," she murmured again, but her voice was soft, lacking the conviction it might have had earlier. I leaned in, my lips almost brushing hers again, my voice barely above a whisper. "But we want to." I said, the truth of it hanging in the air between us, like a secret, only we could understand. There was a part of me that knew this was wrong, that there were boundaries we were crossing, that we could never come back from. But the need, the desire was undeniable. She didn't pull away this time. Instead, her hands, warm and trembling slightly, moved to my face, cupping it gently, as if she were afraid I might disappear if she wasn't careful. Her touch was so intimate, so tender that it made my breath catch in my throat. There was something unspoken in her eyes, something I couldn't quite decipher, but felt all the same, a mixture of guilt, longing, and surrender. And then, as if the decision had been made for her, she kissed me again. This time there was no hesitation, no holding back. Her lips were hungry, needy, as if every moment leading up to this had been building to this one point. I could feel the intensity in her kiss, the way she pressed her body closer to mine, her hands tangling in my hair as she deepened the kiss. I responded with the same urgency, my hands finding their way to her waist, pulling her closer as if the space between us was unbearable. There was no more doubt now, no more second guessing. We were both lost in the moment, consumed by the heat between us. Her hand slid down my chest, slow but deliberate, her touch sending shivers through me. She leaned in closer, her breath hot against my ear as she whispered, "Do you know how long I've been fighting this?" Her words made my heart race, my mind spinning at the thought that this hadn't just been a spur-of-the-moment thing for her. It had been building simmering beneath the surface for far longer than I'd realized didn't know. I admitted my own voice shaky with the weight of what was happening. She pulled back just enough to look at me, her fingers tracing my jawline. As she studied my face, her eyes dark with desire. "I've thought about this," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion about you, about us. "But I always told myself it was wrong, that I couldn't. But being here with you," she trailed off her gaze, dropping to my lips again, her breath coming in shallow gasps. I couldn't take it any longer. I kissed her again, harder this time, my hands roaming her back as I pressed her closer. I wanted Hero needed her in a way that I hadn't realized until this moment. Every touch, every kiss was like fuel to the fire that was burning between us, growing hotter, more intense with each passing. Second Pastor Angela responded with the same intensity, her hand sliding down my back, pulling me tighter against her. There was something frantic about the way we were kissing now, as if we both knew there was no going back, that we had crossed a line and were now diving, headfirst into the unknown. She pushed me gently back onto the couch, her body hovering over mine as she looked down at me, her eyes filled with a mix of desire and something else, something that looked like fear or maybe regret. But it was fleeting, quickly replaced by the overwhelming passion that neither of us could deny. Her hands moved to my shirt, her fingers fumbling slightly as she began to undo the buttons. I could feel her hesitation, the way her hands trembled, but it only added to the intensity of the moment. She wanted this just as much as I did, but the weight of it, the consequences were hanging over us both like a shadow. "Are you sure?" I asked softly, my voice barely audible as I looked up at her. I needed to know, needed to hear her say it, because I knew once we took this step there would be no turning back. She paused for a moment, her eyes locking with mine as she took a deep breath, and then with a soft, almost imperceptible nod, she leaned down and kissed me again, harder, this time. Her hands finished unbuttoning my shirt, and as she slit it off my shoulders I could feel the heat radiating from her body. Her own clothes followed shortly after, and soon there was nothing between us but the heat of our skin, the undeniable pull of desire that had been building for so long. Every touch, every kiss was more intense than the last, the air around us thick with the scent of passion and the sound of our ragged breaths. She guided my hands to her body, her touch firm but gentle, and I could feel the way she trembled beneath my fingers, the way her breath hitched. Every time I touched her in just the right way, it was intoxicating. This power we seemed to have over each other, this overwhelming connection that neither of us could resist. The world outside faded away as we lost ourselves in each other, every moment more intense, more consuming than the last. There was no room for doubt, no space for second thoughts. All that mattered was this moment, this connection, this overwhelming desire that had taken hold of us both and refused to let go. And as the sun began to set, casting the room in a soft golden glow, we surrendered completely to the passion that had been simmering between us for so long. Time lost all meaning, and for those precious moments nothing else existed, but the two of us intertwined in a dance of desire and longing that neither of us wanted to end. But even as we gave into the passion, there was something else, something deeper, more profound, something that told me this wasn't just a fleeting moment of lust. This was something more, something that had been building between us for far longer than either of us had realized. As we lay there, our bodies tangled together, the weight of what we had done slowly began to sink in the passion. The intensity, it was undeniable, but so was the reality of what came next. As we lay there in the stillness, our bodies still entwined, the weight of what we had done began to press down on us. Pastor Angela's breathing was heavy, her fingers lightly tracing my skin, as if she too was struggling to process the reality of what had just happened. The intimacy between us was undeniable, but so was the forbidden nature of it. The room, once filled with the heat of passion, now felt heavier with the silent acknowledgement that we had crossed a line we couldn't uncross. Her eyes met mine, and in them I saw the same conflict that was swirling inside me, the pull of desire warring with the guilt that threatened to swallow us whole. But even with that understanding hanging between us, there was no regret in her touch as she leaned in, her lips brushing mine one final time, slow, tender, but filled with the intensity of everything we had shared. Her voice, soft and breathless, broke the silence. "We can't go back." She whispered, her words laced with the finality of our actions, and though we both knew the cost of what we had done, there was an unspoken agreement in the way she held me this moment. This forbidden connection was something neither of us could ever truly walk away from. The intensity of what we shared would linger, haunting us long after the heat had faded, a reminder of the passion we had surrendered to, even knowing it could never last. When Pastor Angela walked into my home that quiet afternoon, I never expected the visit to unravel everything I thought I knew about boundaries, desire, and control. Her presence, once calming and maternal, began to stir something deeper within me, something forbidden. As our conversations grew more intimate, so did the unspoken tension simmering just beneath the surface. One touch, one kiss, and the line between right and wrong blurred into something neither of us could resist. What followed was a moment that would change us both forever, something so intense we knew there would be no going back.